So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to a sunrise over the Iron Hills for an RP battle that I was given. So this is going to be between a force of Umbar and Linden who march together to try and destroy Cardland. So Cardland seem to be a bit of a menace in this RP because they do pop up quite a lot. So I can only imagine that they are right in the thick of things as it stands. And obviously strange bedfellows from Umbar and Linden, but of course as this is an RP series, this is obviously just players who are in control of these factions in a sort of online multiplayer campaign, as it were, and the Linden and Umbar player, I should say, have decided to join forces to try and take down Cardland here on the Iron Hills. And Cardland will be the defenders because it will be a 3v4, and not only that, but they do have access to the higher ground here on the Iron Hills map, which means they will be able to try and dig in and survive, which is going to be quite necessary because when it comes to Cardland's roster, they do have certain shortcomings when it comes to facing off against Linden and Umbar, but we'll get to that when we talk about Cardland. I think we'll start off with the factions who are taking the aggressive stance, as we usually do in these sorts of things, and that will of course be the blue team down here. We'll start off with this Linden army here, played by Dollar Elf. He's not the only Linden army, but we will start off with him nonetheless. Linden have probably received the least in terms of changes of all the Elven factions in 0.97. Well, I mean, technically, yeah, because both they and Imladris have had much more superficial changes than both Mirkwood and Lothlorien have, and I would say that Imladris have had a couple more significant changes than Linden. Linden have really only had one, to be honest with you. But, you know, that's because Linden didn't really need any changes. As a faction, they already worked as pretty much intended. They have got a couple of new unit mods here in the 4 Linden units. Their helmets have been made a little bit nicer. If I would say one thing, that Linden, maybe they can't skirmish as well as they used to with other factions, but then this is kind of to be expected because Linden are one of those factions with a very clearly defined weakness, and that is their low armor values across the board, of course, which means that they are going to do quite poorly if you just allow them to stand around and get shot. However, if you get into melee quickly with Linden, you'll find that they perform very, very well indeed. They may even be the strongest faction 1-to-1 in melee, but certainly they're right up there. And of course, compared to the other elves, they have access to a lot more pikes and a lot more javelin type units, and their hybrids also mean that they have a lot of tactical versatility, which is always good. Latent versatility, I suppose you would call it, in just bound up in their units, which make Linden a pretty solid choice. So we've got some 4 Linden archers here for Linden. They are the more basic Elven archer, and like most basic Elven archers, they do lack armor. This is not surprising for Linden. But they do still have good damage, good accuracy, good range, but they will still do quite poorly in a skirmish fight if you just leave them out in front to get shot up, because of course they do have low armor. But still, their higher damage and higher accuracy can help them get the first few volleys off in a skirmish fight, which can turn things in their favour, potentially. But winning a skirmish fight is something you should never really bet on as Linden, because that is basically the area of their army where they are at their weakest. A couple of units of Harland Guard, they do slightly better in a skirmish fight because they do have access to those shields, of course, which make them just that little bit more durable. They also pull out spears in melee, so any cavalry that charges into them might get a nasty surprise, as the elves use their melee defense to try and mitigate the charge a little bit and then pull out their spears to try and poke away at that cavalry. But even so, they are a little bit more expensive as a result. But still, this sort of hybrid nature is, of course, what Linden run off of. We have a ballista in there, which is probably just to try and help dislodge Cardland from their very dug-in position, which is understandable. Mithlon Marines, you know, javelins are one of those things which Linden are very well known for, and javelins are an important part of the game as it stands, because they do give you the opportunity to do a lot of damage to a unit very quickly that strays too close. Very useful in particular for dealing with knights, but also for dealing with big blobs of infantry that are standing in your way, which could be a factor here against Cardland. And the Mithlon Marines are also a hybrid unit because they also double as pretty decent line infantry. Not as good as the dedicated unit that Linden have in this area, but nonetheless, just having a unit that can look after itself very well in melee as well as having that very deadly ranged attack make the Mithlon Marines a very attractive unit to bring most of the time. Speaking of which, we have the Harland infantry back here, which are of course Linden's standard line infantry, 3 units of them. Very, very nice. And what makes them so good is just the fact that they are very difficult to wear down in melee. Very nice melee skill, as you would expect from a Linden unit. They also have shields, which make them a little bit better at dealing with arrow fire, but to be honest, they still struggle in this area because, of course, their armor values are still quite low. But combining them with the Linden pikes, which we can see over here actually, a couple of units of 4 Linden pikemen, that makes for a very, very effective front line in melee. It's very difficult to break down Linden from the front. You often need to sort of handle things in a different manner, because if you just tackle Linden head on, their superior melee skill is often going to be a real problem. And then back here we have the elite core of Linden. There's a couple of units here of the Noldorin Guard, probably my favourite unit of Linden actually, because I've played Linden a couple of times with 0.97 myself, and the Noldorin Guard have always been the bedrock of what I've been doing with them, and that's because they inspire nearby units around them. Linden's morale is not a weak spot of the faction by any means anyway, but this just makes them that little bit harder to break, and of course they are one of 2 units in the Linden roster which have good armor values, as well as having that shield, which means they are not going to be easy to wear down from far with arrows, in spite of the fact that they don't have multiple HP. They're very expensive as far as a line infantry unit goes, but also their stats are extremely high, so it's one of those units where if you put them on your flanks or into the centre, they're going to really help your infantry force. I would say that Linden's forces may be a little bit on the smaller side, so you know, it might be that these Noldorin Guard might be focused down, especially by Cardland's crossbows, but we shall see. And then we have the General's Bodyguard unit, the Noldorin Blade Masters, same unit model now, of course, which means they also have decent armour. This would still be my bet for being the strongest two-handed sword unit in the game, although I couldn't be 100% sure of that, just because Elven skill, the armour as well, fantastic killing power, obviously not too many men in the unit, but again, very, very strong unit in its own right. So we'll see. We'll be going through the other Linden army faster, of course. Umbar over here, played by Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, who I think sent me the replay, certainly from his perspective anyway. Umbar, of course, another faction which do very well in terms of their infantry, albeit in a different way. Heavy armour is most certainly their MO. So a lot of infantry power bound up in both Linden and Umbar, especially in relation to Cardland. A couple of units of Corsair infantry here on the front line, which are sort of a bow unit which have a few volleys in them, very similar to the Lake Town infantry over in Dale, before acting as very basic light infantry units on the front line. It's a very good way to sort of start off a skirmish fight because they're cheap enough that you don't really care if you lose a few of them, as well as being able to return fire, and if enemy infantry does come forward, they're capable of defending themselves in melee as well. So a good all-round unit, but don't expect them to win the battle all on their own, because obviously their capabilities both at range and in melee are quite limited. Another ballista, so clearly they were expecting to try and dislodge Cardland from their hilltop position. A couple of units of Alcarondas Legion, another very powerful line infantry unit, not as strong as the Noldorin Guard individually, one of the few units they can count themselves as weaker than. But having said that, they're still going to be far in excess of most of what Cardland's infantry is going to be able to throw at them today. So a very, very nice heavy line infantry unit here. More Alcarondas Legion in behind them as well. Castamir's Rangers obviously for the body-piercing projectiles, which could be devastating if they get into the right position. Harbingers of Castamir, another very powerful two-handed sword unit, heavy swordsman. Again, probably not quite as good as the Noldorin Blade Masters when all is said and done, but they're still a very, very strong unit. Again, there's small margins when you get up to the very best units in the game. Corsair Fencers, some Naruna Aru Sentinels, nice inspiration bonus on them, as well as obviously being a very effective pike unit. Some Balakith Axe Guard without the armour upgrades, but still they actually have pretty decent skill for a heavy axe unit of this type, which is actually one of the reasons why they're probably my favourite axe unit of this price point, at least functionally. I have to say I'm not really a huge fan of the axe model that they've been given. It's a little bit... yeah, I'm not really a fan of it. But having said that, the armour is still very nice, and they're a very effective unit, so they're mechanically, I've got no complaints at all. And also some Balagai Pikemen just to round off the Umbar force here. We'll now head across to the other side. Engsvit's playing as the other Linden army, so he's got some 4 Linden archers on the front again. Harland and Guard, so we're going to be going through this army faster, of course, because he probably has very similar units. Linden's roster is quite limited in scope, even if there's a lot of power bound up in their few units. Harland infantry, very nice line infantry as we said before. 4 Linden Marines are the other javelin unit Linden can bring. They're not, I think they have slightly less damage on their jabbies, and they're slightly worse in melee against infantry. But they are slightly cheaper and they are spears in melee, so it makes them one of the best tools for zoning out cavalry, because not only will they do a lot of damage at range, but also if the cavalry engages them in melee, their spears will also come in very handy indeed. He also has some 4 Linden pikemen in here as well as having the Noldorin Guard, 2 units of Noldorin Guard and Noldorin Blade Masters, so definitely going for a lot of infantry power here. Not a lot of cavalry, interestingly enough, from anyone, which is, it might be that there is RP rules where if it's in the quote-unquote winter months, they can't use cavalry, but even so, that will probably play into Linden and Umbar's hands because of their infantry power, especially when they are combined together. They cover for one another's weaknesses quite well, actually. Some Corsair infantry on the front line from Lister here as well. We've got some Balakith shield bearers as well as some Balagai pikemen. So the shield bearers with the armour upgrade, they're of course the mace men. Not quite as damaging as the axe guard, but the shields and also the armour upgrade in this case means that they will be significantly tougher to wear down from range. We also have the Adunheim Shield Guard, previously the Numenorian Shield Guard, of course. Very high-end spears. You pay a lot for them, but also they're pretty decent in melee just because their high stats offset the spear malice somewhat. And also, of course, they're very nice armour and shields. Alcarondas Legion, Harbingers of Castamere, once again, another ballista, so a lot of siege on display here. Naruna Aru Sentinels, some Belagyr Archers here on this flank as well, some more Shield Guard, some more Axe Guard, as well as some Shield Bearers and Pikemen. So, now we shall move on to Cardland, who I'm interested to see how Cardland handle this, because if it comes down to just a pure melee scrap, they will lose this. Both Umbar and Linden are two factions which pride themselves on having very damaging infantry. Cardland a little bit less so. However, they certainly have the tools. If you can dig in as Cardland, they can be very, very deadly with a lot of their ranged units, their crossbows and their rangers in particular. And I think that's how they're going to have to play this. Use their phalanx and their cheap units to pin the enemy in place, and then really damage them from afar with their ranged. We have some Greenway Garrison Spearmen from Von Mountain here, so obviously just the basic spears. Very cheap, very good at absorbing arrow fire actually, so that's something which they have in their favour, but of course not great in melee. Not a lot of damage that they can do. A lot of Greenway Garrison footmen. Cheap pikes are certainly something that Cardland can field quite a lot of. Most factions can only field 2 of their basic pikes before the red limit is reached. Cardland can field 3 in addition to their Wardens of Tir Gorthad, so they can have 4 in total without going into any sort of overspending, which is always nice. We have some mercenary guildsmen who they have been changed. Their unit model has been changed a little bit, and also they've been given maces, so they are now armour-piercing infantry, so there is a reason to bring them at last, not only for Cardland but anyone else who has access to them, because obviously previously they were just a slightly worse version of the Minhiriath men-at-arms, but no longer. Their AP will be very useful against Umbar, less useful of course against Linden. We have the Minhiriath spearmen over here, so obviously just a unit of basic spears, but without cavalry on the enemy team, or even on this team it looks like, they won't be able to use their anti-cavalry bonus, but with shield wall they should be able to hold the enemy in place. But Umbar's armour piercing and Linden's skill will be very difficult for these units of spears to deal with. 3 units of them. Wardens of Tir Gorthad, so another unit of pikes, of course, higher tier, and they also inspire units around them, so Cardland's low morale will be offset by the Wardens of Tir Gorthad's presence. A couple of archers, and then back here is a sort of rear guard to make sure Linden don't charge them down quickly, because Linden can move quite fast, having a lot of light-foot units. We have Minhiriath archers and Minhiriath sharpshooters, as well as the Menotar Roman gatekeepers, who do not have the armour upgrade. But I also spy over here a unit of Dunedain captains as well, who have the armour upgrade, so that's very nice to see. I do like the Dunedain captain armour upgrade, but yeah, so I think what he's going to do is he is going to pull over to his allies, and they're going to try and set up a defensive posture. Very understandable, because if they try and charge in, then they're going to get slaughtered en masse by Umbar and Linden. We have up here, we have Secretariat, who's going to be playing as the central Cardland force. He's got some sharpshooters up on the cliff. Obviously this is one of the examples of the crossbows taking up a very nasty position. The enemies, as they move forward, will be taking losses. We have Minhiriath spearmen. Again, 3 units of them. In melee, they're really not going to be very good against most of what Umbar and Linden have brought, but they will at least be able to hold the line for some time. Some more sharpshooters up on the raised terrain. This unit of Menotar Roman gatekeepers does have the full plate armour. And then over here some siege, so some ballista over here, but with 3 ballista facing off against them, they may be sniped out pretty easily, we shall see. Minhiriath men-at-arms, so good to see the standard unit. Honestly, I would have said that this probably would have been the safer pick over the spears, just because they will still be outmatched in melee by the Linden and Umbar line infantry, but they will at least do better than the spears. But just in behind them, we also have the Dunedain captains once again, and the mighty Tharbad Warhammers. Their AP will be especially useful against Umbar. And the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, a heavy archer unit which also has an inspiration bonus, although I think this has a very wide area of effect, so this is one of the units you'll probably see quite a lot of against as Cardland, just because having a wide area of effect on that inspiration is going to be very, very useful. And then finally, before we get into the battle properly, we have the final Cardland army played by Waffles. He's got some mercenary guildsmen once again with some Greenwatch Garrison footmen. He's spread out his army a little bit more, it seems. Lots of Minhiriath men-at-arms, some gatekeepers, some sharpshooters, some more footmen over there, some Hearthguard of Amon Sul, and then over here a couple of units of sharpshooters backing up some footmen, and I think, yep, some more mercenary guildsmen. And then way at the back, we have the elites, the captains, the Tharbad Warhammers and the Wardens of Tir Gorthad. They need to move forward, so their inspiration bonus is in effect. They'll be doing no good at all way back there. And then over here near the side we have some more Greenway Garrison archers. So I think I'll make a little cut, because it will take a little while for the attackers to trudge their way into position, so that they're laying siege to the somewhat natural fortress that the Iron Hills offers the team which starts up here. But yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is beginning. So the attackers are getting into position pretty quickly, actually, all things considered. I thought they'd take a little bit longer than this, but you can see the Corsair infantry is going to be forming up here at the bottom of this very steep and imposing hill, but of course they will be able to skirmish with the defenders a little bit before they move in. But of course it is worth saying that the Greenway Garrison Spearmen, what they are best at is absorbing arrow fire. They can absorb quite a lot of punishment there because they have a nice shield value. Their armour is very basic, obviously just chain, but you know, their shields will certainly help them here, and the Corsair infantry don't really have anything else that they can shoot at, nothing that's overly, when I say that, the bandits have revealed themselves, and that's because they're on fire at will. They really don't want to be using their javelins on Corsair infantry if they can help it, because again, their ranged power is going to be extremely important to what they're going to be doing. Speaking of which, Von Mountain has revealed his Dunedain Rangers. It's unsurprising to see Dunedain Rangers here. They are going to actually start shooting, although I'm actually a little bit confused as to why. That was actually a blank fire, so he cancelled that, which is good because he's moving into position and he's immediately going to get shot by Corsair infantry. I'm not sure whether he's unaware that the Corsair infantry do now have bows, because I can't imagine he would have charged into that situation if he realised that. Because a couple of Rangers going down there, and Rangers are a tool that you cannot afford to waste in this situation if you're Cardland. You will absolutely desperately need them to really pull their weight in this fight. Corsair infantry are reloading once again. They'll probably go for the bandits as well, especially with their backs turned. Their very basic shields won't even be coming into effect there. And of course this is the benefit to forcing off the enemy's dangerous skirmishers. Yeah, and they are going to go for the bandits. Now, if they decided to come in with their infantry, the only thing standing in the way really would be these Greenway Garrison Spearmen. That's the Corsair infantry showing their versatility there. Engsvitz is now also moving into position. And those spearmen having to hold position. So Cardland's still pretty much in full retreat. And they're going to need to form up pretty quickly here because they're retreating and they're allowing shots into their back. Which is not good because it means that their shields are not going to be coming into effect, and already they're bleeding precious manpower. And they're going to need every man available to hold the front line. And Minhiriath men-at-arms, again, you can't afford to lose too many of them, and the 4 Linden archers aren't going to miss too many of their shots. And in the backs of this kind of unit, that's going to be a problem. And you can see now over here that this unit of Greenway Garrison Spearmen, seeing the opportunity to finish them off fairly cheaply, Eclipse 2500 is going to come in with his Corsair infantry, surround them and destroy them. Obviously they were left behind a little bit, so this is going to be essentially a free kill of a unit that Eclipse 2500 has managed to achieve, moving in tandem there with the Linden Elves of Engsvitz, and that's good teamwork. And already I think Cardland have been guilty a little bit of panicking slightly, as you know, honestly it wasn't even a lightning fast assault, so hopefully Cardland can recover a little bit as the battle goes on, because obviously the defenders are always up against it in this sort of situation really, and Cardland can't rely on having a great deal of an advantage in melee either. They're going to be fully reliant really on their ranged units to try and win this battle. The Corsair infantry pulling out their sabres, surrounding the Greenway Garrison Spearmen, and cut off as they are, the Cardland militia are almost certainly going to rout very, very quickly. In spite of the fact that they now look much more impressive, mechanically speaking, they are still very much the same kind of unit as they always were. The Corsair infantry, one of the few units of Corsairs that Umbar has held onto, pretty much the cheapest unit that Umbar can field now, but they certainly still have their place, a very versatile force, as I'm sure that you've already seen. As they have shot a few rangers, a few bandits, and now they've closed down these spears in melee and will finish them off. Meanwhile, Linden are the ones that are actually taking the most aggressive stance, which is interesting. There's also some Corsair infantry here from Lister, so they're definitely going to be using their bowmen here to try and soften the enemy up for the kill. 4 Linden archers, Corsair infantry, Harland infantry are nearby as well, Bodyguard archers. So this demands some sort of response here from Cardland, because if they just sit here and allow themselves to get shot, individual targets are definitely going to be in a good deal of trouble here. Minhiriath archers are here, which under normal circumstances would be able to skirmish with a lot of these units fairly easily. And now here we can see that the Minhiriath men-at-arms once again are showing the enemy their back, which is dangerous. If the Linden player realises this, they can shoot these men-at-arms in the back and they'll be able to kill off quite a few units. Even the Umbar Corsair infantry would be able to do that. Greenway Spearmen are going to try and take the Minhiriath men-at-arms position on the front line. Yeah, and you can see here that immediately they do that, so Minhiriath men-at-arms getting shot in the back. They still have decent armour, which will save some of them, but honestly, without the shield pointing the right way, that makes a big difference to the survivability of men-at-arms units against archers. So a good bit of battlefield awareness there from the attackers. The Harland infantry moving forward. The Harland infantry have made quick work of Greenway Garrison spears. Corsair infantry moving into position as well. And I think, yeah, those spears are dead to the last man as Umbar and Linden move menacingly into position. Having a look from the hilltop, we can see Linden are also putting pressure on the other side. You can see the Greenway Garrison archers from one of the Cardinal players in a good position here on this little outcropping, this little ledge, and they are going to be shooting at Linden as they move forward, which is good because, of course, Linden, they certainly aren't the best when they're under arrow fire. Even a very basic unit of archers like the Greenway Garrison archers will be able to inflict some pretty decent casualties, but once again, it does look as though the attacks are going to be leading the way with their skirmishers. A lot of the Umbar and Linden archers hoping to soften the enemy up for the kill. Harland infantry here as well. Bodyguard archers shooting practically point blank. Shooting here into this phalanx, and yeah, the Greenway Garrison footmen, they're out here without any form of shield support. And Waffles is just getting this single unit of pikes, and they're focusing it down, and this is again a good pick from the attackers. And at this point, like again, when you have a pike formation like this, you really need to have a shielded unit just in front of them to prevent this from happening. Otherwise, archers are going to have a field day at shooting your pikes because, you know, it's always going to be efficient. They don't have a shield. Phalanx is going to be so useful to a Cardinal in this situation for holding the enemy at bay as well. And they're a bit guilty here of taking needless casualties, because you can see here with the shields pointing the right way, even from the Minhiriath archers with the shields on their back, these Minhiriath units are much more durable now that they're facing the right direction against this kind of archer fire. But of course, the attackers still just very willing to try and wear the enemy down. Von Mountain, they're trying to absorb these casualties, Cardinal, but I don't think they have the luxury of being able to do that. There is actually a melee engagement happening over here, though. You can see that those four Linton archers have been shot at point blank by Waffles. The mercenary guildsmen are moving in. The Harland infantry were being kept at arm's length by the Greenway Garrison footmen anyway. And a single unit of Harland infantry is not going to be enough to make any sort of impact on this front line. And especially with the assistance of the mercenary guildsmen coming in from this side, the Harland infantry are going to be in real trouble. The AP will not be helpful, but just the fact that there is a dedicated heavier infantry unit on the front line here, the Harland infantry will start to struggle. Another unit of Harland infantry coming in, that should be enough to cause some trouble for the mercenary guildsmen, but these pikes are still going to be a real issue. So whereas things are going pretty poorly for the defenders on the other side, things have started off quite well over here actually. They've managed to deal very easily with Linden's archers. Linden's archers are in full view there of the Greenway Garrison archers just in behind the phalanx. And that's proving to be very difficult for Dollar Elf to deal with, but all Dollar Elf I think needs to do is keep up the pressure on this side, because there's an overwhelming force of infantry over on the other side. Speaking of which, some reinforcements are going to be absolutely necessary to help keep these Greenway Garrison spearmen on this line, because the Corsair infantry, even as basic as they are going to be superior in melee to the Cardinal militia spears. Yeah, and support is going to be needed. These Minhiriath units are just sort of hanging around doing nothing. But just one unit would be enough. Like one unit of Minhiriath men-at-arms would be enough to turn the tide of this fight heavily in the other direction. The Corsair infantry would be no match for them. There are those hidden units of skirmishers up on the hilltop, of course, including the Dunedain Rangers, who have been shooting at what? There are a few arrows hitting the dirt, but most of them are finding their way into the enemy position, and they're going after Balakith shield bearers, Bodyguard pikemen, Alcarondas Legion, Linden forces as they move forward. It's not a perfect target for Rangers, but they are certainly going to be able to get a decent amount of damage done to the attackers here, which is definitely going to be very necessary. There's also the Cardinal Ballista from Secretariat shooting in there, probably trying to snipe out the enemy artillery, which is definitely a worthwhile cause, because if the attacking artillery gets a good handle on the defensive positions, that's going to be disastrous. Von Mountain's Greenway Garrison footmen pushing their way in as well, so a bit of a phalanx going on. That should be enough to turn this fight in the other direction, to be honest with you. Corsair infantry all on their lonesome shouldn't be able to deal with pikes and spears acting in unison, especially not with those Gwathlo trackers up on the hills also shooting into the backs of the Corsair units. Still though, Waffles is very guilty of just leaving this hanging this pike unit out to dry. Like, he should just commit them forwards. If you're going to leave them here to get shot, you might as well just commit them in. At least then they're going to do something in melee. Some Minhiriath men-at-arms being committed forward by Secretariat. Let's see what's going on over here. So Dollar Elf is moving forward with even more units now, and he is now going pike to pike with Cardland, which is perhaps what he should have done from the start. The 4 Linden pikes are going to be far superior to the Greenway Garrison footmen. It is interesting to see Waffles commit forward all these Merc Guildsmen as well, because Mercenary Guildsmen, their AP is not going to be useful against Linden at all. Picking and choosing your engagements is important, and you absolutely want to be using your Merc Guildsmen here against the more heavily armoured Umbar contingent if you can help it. Because even the Noldorin Guard will be so superior to the Merc Guildsmen that the AP won't be overtly useful unless you get a really, really good engagement against them. Mithlon Marines are coming forward, immediately taking a bunch of damage. The Minhiriath sharpshooters from Von Mountain have been really laying down a beatdown on Dollar Elf's army as they come forward. Because when last we looked, there was a unit of 4 Linden archers over here. Now it's Harland and Guard. And still, Dollar Elf is not able to get his skirmishers into a good position to really start doing damage to the Cardland line. And Cardland are committing forward more reinforcements. Minhiriath men-at-arms. Linden were making a little bit of progress against the lower tier Cardland forces here, but at this point I feel as though the numbers are so far in Cardland's favour on this front line that Cardland will be able to hold. There's those Greenway Garrison archers shooting into Linden as well, and this is where Linden are at their weakest. When they're forced into an engagement like this, where they're taking a pounding from range, and they're really starting to struggle here, they aren't going to be able to break through, and indeed their attack is actually going to falter before they make any sort of headway on this side. So that's good news for the defenders. It means that they should be able to commit more of their resources over here to help hold this line. And with the Minhiriath men-at-arms and the Greenway Garrison pikes on the front line here, the Corsair infantry also getting shot in the back by Gwathlo trackers, this assault is going to break off pretty quickly. There's some Linden forces on the front line as well, some Harland and infantry right in the middle. But with the arrow fire and with the additional Cardland reinforcements on the front line, that shouldn't be too difficult for them to deal with. We shall see. Let's see back here. They have a lot of Minhiriath units and mercenary units that they can commit to the front line Cardland, but my worry would be as soon as they start sending forward more elite units, the attackers, particularly the Umbar forces of like Shield Bearers, Axe Guard, and Alcarondas Legion, I'm not sure whether Cardland are going to be able to withstand that sort of pressure unless they have all their ranged units in very nice positions indeed. Balakith Shield Bearers are on their way in. 4 Linden archers trying to do some skirmishing on the front line. A combination of Shield Bearers and Balagire pikemen. The Balagire pikemen, of course, will be able to go pike to pike, and they are the superior pike individually when compared to the Greenway Garrison footman. Numbers, however, do come into things. More fire arrows coming in, some of them hitting their own men. Still arrows flying everywhere. Defenders have stabilised a little bit, which is good to see. Over here, meanwhile, this side of the front line still, you can see that when Cardland are left to their own devices in melee against the superior Linden infantry, things start to go heavily against them. The 4 Linden pikemen and the Harland infantry, a winning combination, often able to do the business here against the Greenway Garrison spears, footmen, and the Merc Guildsmen that were here previously. Another unit of pikes are coming in now, however, from Waffles. In addition to that, the unit that perhaps should have been committed, the Mercenary Guildsmen, instead of the Mercenary Guildsmen, the Minhiriath men-at-arms are now coming in. They will do better, of course, and the Harland infantry are already depleted, so this could be a win here for Cardland. They've at the very least managed to shore up their defences and make sure that Dollar Elf could not break through over on this side. Very depleted archers over there. They really took a beating, the Linden forces. There's also still the Minhiriath sharpshooters and Dunedain rangers over here, who are firing away into the Linden forces. And they're bunched up in this corner. I mean, if they can reach the Noldorin units, that would be a really good situation for them to be in. But they also have to worry about the ballista, because that was a hit, wasn't it? Yeah, right through the Dunedain rangers and the Minhiriath sharpshooters. Need to get the rangers out there. Von Mountain's been far too sort of overt with his rangers in this fight already. He's lost too many of them. And the rangers are going to be such a big part of Cardland's hopes of winning this fight that they can't afford to be lost cheaply. Meanwhile, there is a way through here, I think. This sort of bit of terrain sort of makes it difficult, but I think there is a path that you can take through here, which is why the spearmen are sort of formed up and ready to receive them. The Balakith shield bearers are on the line now, as well as the Balagire pikes, but they're not making much progress. The AP will help, but with more men-at-arms and more Minhiriath spearmen coming in, this line will continue to hold for Cardland for the time being. More fire arrows coming in though. There aren't any inspiration units on the front line, so it's not the worst idea to maybe try and shock Cardland's morale. Don't think there are any. Yeah, there's nothing near enough. Well, the Wands of Tir Gorth are there, but I don't think that's close enough. No, certainly not close enough. More Corsair infantry being committed forward from Lister. More men to just try and wear down this Cardland phalanx. Cardland have done okay though so far. Things were looking a little bit dicey earlier on. Minhiriath archers now firing into the attacks as they move forward. The ballista crew taking a bunch of damage, and I mean, even if they don't hit the ballista crew, they'll still hit some Linden archers or some Alcarondas legion, so the perfect target. The attackers getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves there, I think, trying to push the ballista in. You can see there also more Minhiriath archers doing the business, getting a lot of hits there. To be fair, the Alcarondas legion will be able to weather that storm relatively easily. Good armour, nice shields. Linden archers will be a little bit less grateful for that attention, however. An even fight here on the front line, which definitely favours the attackers, because of course they have more men that they can commit forward later. Minhiriath men-at-arms doing their best to try and hold the line. Still more arrows flying into the back. Greenway garrison archers now, Gwathlo trackers presumably out of ammunition. And all the arrows that are hitting the backs of the Umbar forces as they move forward, certainly doing a lot to help Cardland's chances on this front line. More reinforcements being committed forward as well. This side of the front line looking a little bit depleted. So some Minhiriath men-at-arms being committed forward by Secretariat. And against Corsair infantry and depleted Balakith shield bearers, the Minhiriath men-at-arms should be enough to secure victory there. And their shields will still be coming into effect from the front. On Mountain sending forward some pikes, but immediately the attackers notice them, and immediately they're going to try and shoot them down. That is of course the downside to having a load of pikes. More easily shot. 4 Linden archers. I mean, this is honestly a waste of ammunition. Like, if there's only 6 of them left, like, you really don't need... Well, they're routing, so that's still... Like, that's a lot of good ammunition that they're wasting there. And Dollar Elf knows it. That's why he's keeping these units over here, hoping to waste the ammunition. It's sharpshooters as well. Yeah, that's not good. I mean, I think he stopped them from firing now. But you really need to keep on top of your skirmishers in this sort of situation. I keep saying it. If Cardland are going to win this, it'll be on the back of units like their rangers and their crossbows. If they waste ammunition, any volleys that are wasted are a real tragedy from a Cardland perspective, because the more and more it becomes about prowess in melee, the more and more it will suit the attackers. Here on the front line, still Cardland managing to hold back the horde for now, as more arrows come flying in. A Dunaim shield guard also getting into an attacking position. Of course, spears not necessarily the fastest at killing units, and indeed here come the Minhiriath spearmen. Ooh, a flurry of bolts that sounded like. Indeed, Menotar Romen gatekeepers here getting some very nice hits there into the back of the Dunaim shield guard. However, the Umbar front line is breaking, and actually Cardland coming forwards, and I think they've realised their mistake there. They're going to get back into position pretty quickly. A la the Battle of Hastings, where the Normans made a sort of false retreat and then crushed the Saxons as they rushed forward. That threatened to be something like that, and it could still be that, as Von Mountain and Secretariat move to engage the Harland infantry. The Dunaim shield guard already taking a bunch of losses there from the crossbows. And now there's a bit of a gap here that the attackers can use for their archers. Not only that though, Umbar can see a gap that has appeared thanks to Cardland's exuberance to engage the Linden pikes and infantry, and the Alcarondas Legion have this gap that they can now exploit. Secretariat is going to need to plug that gap with these spears. He's going to need to do it quickly as well. Yeah, it could be a textbook false retreat, that, as the Alcarondas Legion move in. And the Alcarondas Legion attacking these units in the back immediately enough to break them. That is an example of Cardland's lower morale at work, and they're already shaken as well. And that was just a case of the defenders getting a little bit too big for their boots there. They needed to keep their shape, and they lost their discipline a bit and charged forward. And now, a unit of spearmen being committed a little bit too late. If they'd have seen that happening sooner, they perhaps would have been able to prevent that. But the Alcarondas Legion, they are getting pelted by those crossbows, to be fair. But, having said that, they did their job there. They caused a lot of panic in the Cardland lines. A lot of those forces are routing. They did a lot of damage. Cardland have recovered, but even still, you can see here the Harland infantry actually managing to get in behind enemy lines now, getting into the Minhiriath archers. Cardland won't be too concerned about that, though. That's an example, I think, of the attackers maybe getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves, because they're not really going to make too much of an impact on the archers here, the Harland infantry. They're just going to be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of spears and archers they're fighting. Alcarondas Legion moving into position, although those Minotaur Roman gatekeepers are almost certainly going to get some very nasty hits on them. But here you can see that the Cardland line has not really recovered from that that mishap that happened just now, because there are still gaps there. I mean, it's unfortunate, I think, for the attackers that pikes are the only thing they have which are really pushing through the line, because that's really the last thing you want doing that sort of thing. You could really do with that being the Alcarondas Legion, but still, it does go to show that the attackers have made an impact on Cardland's organisation, and the more that they can do that, the more that it's going to come down to skill in melee, which of course Lyndon and Umbar have in spades. Hearthguard of Amon Sul doing the business, chasing the Mythlon Marines off. So Dollar Elf is doing the right thing over here. He's just sort of playing a game of cat and mouse with Waffles' front line, because he can't make another advance like he had earlier on, because that went heavily in favour of the defenders. The ballista, the angle is just not right for it. If the angle was slightly less steep, he would be able to go right through that front line of Minhiriath men-at-arms, but as it is, the ballista's having issues with the angle itself. Those Mythlon Marines, there may only be 6 of them, but they're still able to throw their jabbies in here, and they'll be able to get the odd kill here on the men-at-arms, trying to get as much value as they can. But over here is where the main event is happening. Fire arrows landing all around. Those Harland infantry were surrounded and cut down, but once again the attackers overcommitting to destroying a single unit, and now the Alcarondas Legion have been able to get through this little gap, and they've now secured a bit of a beachhead over on this side of things, right up in the face of the Minhiriath Arch, and it's 2 units of Alcarondas Legion, which is not the sort of thing which Cardland are going to be able to force back, not through strength of arms. They'll have to use like crossbows or something, and all their their crossbows are back here, but you can see actually this Harland infantry, it must have been another unit that came forward and took advantage of this gap, because the Harland infantry getting into the Minhiriath sharpshooters, preventing them from firing. Very good work by the attackers here, shutting down the skirmishers, which would have been Cardland's best hope of punishing the attackers for this. And now the attackers are going to be able to make it all about strength in melee, and Minhiriath archers are going to be no match at all for Alcarondas Legion. And Cardland's front line, it's starting to look a little bit ropey. It's a little bit bumpy. Balakith Axguard are moving in now as well. The AP will be very useful against the Minhiriath units. Alcarondas Legion facing off against more Minhiriath archers. A very lopsided fight indeed. You can see that what they're trying to do is use their crossbows, but Engsfit's doing a very good job of making sure he can't do that with his Harland and infantry. More Minhiriath sharpshooters coming over here, so they are going to still try and use their crossbows. They're going to try and salvage this situation, but they're going to need to do it quickly, otherwise their line is going to break. Like, these Minhiriath archers are not going to last long against Alcarondas Legion and Balakith Axguard. Forward comes some mercenary guildsmen. The AP will be honestly wasted against Harland infantry. Once again, the mercenary guildsmen are being used primarily against Lyndon, which is the wrong way round. There are some Merc guildsmen on this front line as well, facing off against some Balagar pikes and what was shield bearers, I think. But that's mostly pikemen now. And you can see there's also some 4 Lyndon Marines using their javelins in the front line now as well, taking advantage of the chaos to move forward, because now Cardland are going to have to try and use all their skirmishers to take on the Lyndon and Umbar infantry, which is going to leave the door open for the Lyndon javelins to move into position unopposed and do horrendous damage here to this Cardland infantry. Very nice indeed. Warns of Tir Gorthad are moving forward now, but again too late. Like, them on the front line would have made it so Cardland would have been less likely to rout earlier, but they've been committed forward too late again. I feel as though the defenders are a little bit too guilty of trying to preserve their elites again. I keep saying how much of a mistake that is, and yet people keep doing it. And Von Mountain is no scrub either. He knows what he's doing. so he should really know better. And Secretariat as well is a player that's been playing a lot lately, so he also should have learned that lesson. But as it is, Cardland's basic units have been run over by a lot of these units. These crossbows have, again, made the attackers pay for this. And that's really what the defenders are going to have to hope for. The fact that the attackers are just going to take enough losses on the way through here that they're going to be able to win in the late game. The Balakith Axguard able to get in behind the lines, prevent the sharpshooters from firing once again. The Alcarondas Legion doing the business on the front line. The Axguard may be overextending a little bit, but it's to try and shut down the sharpshooters. At this point, I feel as though Dollar Elf should move forward. Really put a lot of pressure here, because it will be costly still. But with what's happening on the other side, I feel as though the attackers have the opportunity now to move in and do a bunch of damage. There's Noldorin Guard on the way forward from Engsvitz now as well, so really piling on the pressure. And the attackers saw those Dunedain Rangers over here. There's those Minhiriath sharpshooters, which at this point are cut off. They're surrounded. Yeah, there are the Dunedain Rangers. Hiding is not going to be enough to save them. And Dunedain Rangers will not be the match of the Alcarondas Legion in melee. Very good work from the attackers. Noldorin Guard are here. The pikes are not completely out of formation, to be fair. The Balakith Axguard are still back here. Of course, Umbar's morale is pretty good overall. But there are only 34 of them left, and they find themselves deep in enemy territory. Surrounded, well, overwhelmed here by Minhiriath men-at-arms. Yeah, and they routed. Getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves, trying to chase down the Minotaur Roman gatekeepers. But now with the crossbow's attention diverted over here, yep, good to see the Dollar Elf is now going to take advantage of the situation as it has presented itself and attack. I mean, he is going to take losses here, but pressuring from multiple angles here is the best hope that the attackers have to really make this a good engagement for them. Even the Dunedain captains are shaken, so it goes to show the strength that Lyndon and Umbar descended on the front line with. The Wardens of Tir Gorthard also wavering, finding themselves surrounded and overwhelmed by Balakith Axguard, Alcarondas Legion, Harland Infantry. All very, very nice units. Yeah, very nice. And it all came down to, again, that sort of Battle of Hastings-like thing that happened. They chased down the units as they retreated and were made to pay for that almost immediately by the attackers, which is it's good to see, honestly. Very, very nice use of the units. And Cardland then, it felt like panic started to set in for Cardland then. They were sort of trying to paper over the cracks as they appeared. And now this is also something which is a bit of panic setting in, because Cardland, seeing that they're about to get sandwiched, has left their retreat a little bit too late. They're going to have to leave some of these units behind, and unfortunately the ones at the back are the Minhiriath sharpshooters. The last unit they would have wanted to leave behind, because now Dollar Elf is coming forward with his force. His Noldorin Guard is still alive. He still has Mithlon Marines and Harland Infantry as well. He's got some pikes, and he is also meeting up with Engsvitz's Linden Elves as well. And they are going to be nipping away at Waffles' heel, killing off a lot of his units. And he is going to leave, I think, is he going to leave these? I think he was thinking of leaving those units behind them, but I think he realised they were his crossbows. He needs to get them out of there, as Cardland are in full retreat. But Lister is coming in as well with Umbar, and they could yet cut these units off. The Adunheim Shield Guard already trying to do that. Unupgraded Dunedain captains and Hearthguard of Amon Sul will be able to kill them off pretty quickly, but the Adunheim Shield Guard, I'm pretty sure, are locked morale, so these 9 men will fight to the death, getting in the way of Cardland's retreat. As if that wasn't enough, the attackers are still keeping up the pressure. They're not giving Cardland room to breathe. And there goes what must be Waffles' as general, I would assume, as his army was he left their retreat a little bit too long. And now this front line made up of Gwathlo trackers is under pressure as well from Alcarondas Legion and Belagai pikes. But still, there are still Dunedain Rangers over the other side of the river. There are still Hearthguard of Amon Sul. There's still ranged units that Cardland have at their disposal. And to be fair, on the retreat, they could surround and destroy the Alcarondas Legion and Belagai pikes, but they're in the way. And this is a golden opportunity once again for the attackers to do grievous damage to Waffles' army as they move forwards. Yeah, they're stuck here because the Alcarondas Legion have got very nice morale as well. They're very difficult to break. So even with all of these Cardland forces going through them, once again, huge swathes of units of 80 men or more of basic Cardland forces being routed. It was a very nice attack, I have to say. Like, from the surface it doesn't look that much different to a normal attack, but the attackers really did a very nice job of choosing that to move when they did. And now the Alcarondas Legion, they're going to surround and eliminate another portion of Waffles' army. And to be fair, Waffles wasn't even the one that was defending that position over there. It was Von Mountain's Secretariat, but Waffles did leave his retreat too long, and as a result, he's the one that has ultimately paid most of the price for that. Dunedain Rangers able to get good shots there into the big blob of Umbar and Linden as they blobbed up on those Cardland forces, the silver lining to that cloud. But Cardland are still retreating, like they're still sort of moving backwards, trying to form up a new position, which they're going to have to go right back to the top of the hill, I think. Because they just can't form up a line quickly enough, and this is another thing the attackers have done really well. They've hounded Cardland, they haven't allowed them to set up another defensive position quickly. And that is good. Very nice moves here. It doesn't hurt as well that Umbar and Linden are two factions, which when you think about it, they do complement one another very nicely. The heavy-duty nature of Umbar with their heavily armoured infantry, a lot of AP as well in melee. Linden with their defensive skill and the javelins. Opposites attract, I suppose. Here come the Balakith Axe Guard. They're sort of surrounding and defeating the Dunedain Rangers. I would assume that this unit of Dunedain Rangers is out of ammunition, which is why they're sort of being used as the rear guard, as well as the ballista crew. Probably going to come in to be used for something similar, just to give Cardland a little bit more time to try and set up a more comprehensive defence. But this is where the attacking artillery will come into play. We haven't really seen the attacking ballistas do much of anything, but now they will be able to bombard the defensive position and once again use one of their tools to good effect. Minhiriath sharpshooters, still the Cardland crossbows, are doing damage, and that is the beauty of playing as Cardland. You can always make it a costly affair for an enemy to advance through you, because those crossbows can be so savagely damaging. A lot of stopping power on them, although they probably should be going for the Noldorin Guard, to be honest with you. Noldorin Guard are a very dangerous unit. The ballista crew is of course routing, very unsurprisingly. Linden are also moving forward, the 4 Linden Marines using their javelins point blank onto the Minhiriath sharpshooters, who are already shaken. And the 4 Linden archers are trying to catch up to them, and of course this is also where Linden's lighter nature comes into play, because Linden are so fast in relation to a more heavily armoured faction like Cardland that all of their Lightfoot units are able to rapidly get into melee and prevent Cardland from being able to retreat quickly. So again, that's something else which has acted in the attacker's favour here. Cardland's still retreating really, but they have managed to set up a front line at the very least now. But they are already under attack. The Harland Guard shooting away at them. 4 Linden archers, very depleted 4 Linden archers though. Minotaur Romen gatekeepers have pulled out their halberds. I'm not sure what they're doing advancing down the hill. They need to stay in formation. They're just going to get themselves outnumbered and destroyed. Bodyguard, Pikeman, Alcarondas Legion moving into position. The heavy Umbar infantry, as well as the heavy Linden infantry. And the Minotaur Roman gatekeepers, I think, realising that they're getting a little bit too far ahead of their support. They don't want to charge in to the teeth of the Umbar and Linden force. As we approach the final 10,000 frames, Dunedain Captains trying to be shot. Dunedain Captains, one of those units which Cardland can call upon here in the late game to do the business. But unfortunately Linden can also do the same with the Noldorin Blade Masters. But if we do have a look, I mean there are still units filtering in over here, but it's not a huge army that the attackers have left. They definitely did pay the price for running through Cardland in that way. It was definitely the right thing to do, but now they need to... They definitely don't want to give Cardland the opportunity to make back some of those losses with their crossbows. Secretariat has got his Minhiriath sharpshooters already firing away into the attackers as they move up the hill. A nice shower of bolts there greeting the Linden forces. I don't know what unit they're actually going for. I mean, if they're going for the 4 Linden archers, that's a real win. I don't think they are. I think what they're trying to do is maybe go for that unit of Balakith Axe Guard. Now they're going to go for the Mythlon Marines, however. Very, very nice. Dollar Elf has been on the receiving end of this sort of thing a lot in this battle. Definitely of all the attackers, he's had the hardest time of things, you would think. Because he's trying to get those Mythlon Marines into position, but immediately a Napoleonic-like volley there of crossbow bolts into the Mythlon Marines. Now in Irish Sentinels, here comes one Umbar Ballista. I mean, again, I'm not sure why the attackers have slowed down. I guess they're trying to regroup their forces down here at the base of the hill, because their army did become quite stretched with the rapid nature that they pushed through that defence. But as soon as they have regrouped, they definitely should just advance up the hill as rapidly as they can and try to overwhelm Cardland, because the longer that they remain here, allowing the Cardland skirmishers to make back some of the casualties that they've inflicted, the more of a chance that Cardland have in this battle. Depends, of course, on how much ammunition Cardland actually have left. I think the Minotaur, Rom and Gatekeepers are all out of ammunition. They make for decent melee troops, but definitely those bolts are what is needed at the moment. Tharbad Warhammers, Half-Guard of Avalon Soul, so it's not as if Cardland are devoid of quality here in the late game. In fact, most of their quality is here. That is the upshot of them kind of refusing to commit their units of quality earlier, which they probably should have, to my mind. It never pays to try and just save all of your elite units to the end. I feel as though having your elite units in from the start really does help out a bit. Fallen Marines coming forward, forcing the Cardland sharpshooters in many ways to use some of their ammunition on a unit they probably would rather not, because if they just stand here and take this javelin fire, they will of course take losses which they can't afford. So the bolts obviously mowing down those Fallen Marines, but eating up more of that precious, precious Cardland ammunition. More sharpshooters. Telltale whistle of crossbow bolts. And there is the Umbar Ballista going right through several units, actually. Right through a very strong point of the Card infantry as well. Dunedain Captains are charging forward. The Fallen Marines will probably get away, although the Dunedain Captains get up to charge speed and prevent them from retreating, so that should be enough. Yeah, that's enough to break them. Nice catch from Cardland. That will prevent those annoyances from continuing, but one annoyance that will continue is that Ballista. Now you can see that Eclipse 2500 getting his forces forward, so you would imagine that the attack is probably going to commence fairly soon. Although having said that, I feel as though the attackers can get away with wearing the enemy down a little bit more with their ballistae before moving in and trying to overwhelm them in melee. Those gatekeepers from Secretariat, the upgraded ones, still have ammunition. They've still got their crossbows out. Cardland going to try and retreat yet further, although they are running out of map to do so. It's actually rare that we see this very top section used. I've never really seen a battle happen up here. It's always been sort of down here in this basin that the final stand has been made. Some gatekeepers heading out onto this spit of land over here. Here in loose formation, the Minhiriath sharpshooter is going to try and move forward a little bit, perhaps to try and disperse the Harland and Guard. Minhiriath sharpshooters, again, that's a bit of a waste from Von Mountain. Like, there's no need to shoot a unit that's only got 2 men left in it. Like, each crossbow volley is so precious at this point for Cardland, and yeah, like that's just that's a waste. Definitely not what you want to be doing. Crossbows, though, this probably is worthwhile because those Harland Guard do still have ammunition and they are poking away at your line, so I do feel as though they've already, because like these archers are not really a great threat. I mean, most of Cardland's forces that are left are going to be able to absorb arrow fire relatively easily. This Harland Guard point blank shots here. I mean, honestly, the attackers are going to be licking their lips at this because the defenders are really being far too free with their crossbows, using them on targets that they really shouldn't, because I mean they will really wish that they had crossbows in the later game when they're facing off against Noldorin Guard, Noldorin Blade Masters, Alcarondas Legion, a bunch of Balakith units as well. There's Narina Irish Sentinels in here. You know, if Cardland were to have any hope in this battle, they need to use those crossbows to maximum effect against the most important units, and they haven't done that. They've been just using it on any old target. The Ballista is up on the hill, but honestly at this point, the Ballista crew, I feel as though this is still what the attackers are doing. They're just coaxing the defenders into using those bolts, and as soon as they feel as though they've run out of enough ammo, they'll move forward in force, and again, just as they did in the engagement down there, make it all about power and melee, which is always how the attackers were going to win this fight, and it's always how the defenders were going to lose it. Don't get me wrong, Harland have got a lot of good units in melee, but in comparison to Umbar and Linden, they lag behind in that respect. Especially when they're facing both at the same time. It's not as if they can focus heavily on AP like they could if it were just Umbar, or on sort of their more skill-based units like they could if it were just Linden. Still those 4 Linden archers slowly poking and prodding away here at the Minhiriam sharpshooters. Amron! Yeah, and that Umbar ballista now once again wearing down the defensive line. And I can see why the attackers are a little bit less keen to move in there, because at the top of that hill, of course, lie Dunedain captains and Tharbad warhammers and Wardens of Tir Gorthad, as well as Manatar Romen gatekeepers, which are also pretty good in melee. The AP offered by the sharpshooters in melee would also be not great for Umbar, but ultimately their strength in melee is overwhelming at this point. Just having all of these Noldorin units here is just a terrifying prospect for Cardland to have to deal with. Blade Masters, Guard. There's also still Shield Bearers back here. Nice bit of AP. And still the Ballista continuing to scythe through these men, once again just picking away at Cardland's valuable manpower. They don't need to be devastating shots at this point, they just need to land. Piling ever more pressure onto the Cardland line. Still, the prep continues. I mean, it does look as though at the very least the defenders have ceased using their crossbows frivolously. Those ballistas going all over the place, only killing off, I say one, another 3 Wardens of Tir Gorthad falling by the wayside there. Bodyguard archers shuffling their way forwards. That was a good hit from the ballista. 3 Manatar Romen gatekeepers falling away, upgraded as well. Greenway garrison archers moving in position. Do they still have ammunition? They do. They still have their bows out. Perhaps not the most damaging archer, but anything will help here in the late game for Cardland to try and salvage the situation. These Minhiriath sharpshooters are still firing away. To be fair, they're so depleted at this point that, you know, maybe it is worth just trying to pick away at the skirmishes that the attackers are using. Another decent hit, as yet more valuable manpower goes begging. Harland and Guard still picking away at the enemy lines as well. Good accuracy, good damage. Of course, most of the Cardland forces that are left heavily armoured and shielded, so a unit of 9 is unlikely to swing the fight significantly, but every little helps. Everyone's got to pull their weight in a fight like this. Still some Mithlon Marines, still some Harland and Guard. Some rumblings back down here, so yeah, once again, it's going to be a very quick affair here in the late game as we approach the very final phases of this fight. And I can't help but feel as though that most certainly favours the attackers, because I can't see Cardland rapidly finishing off Linden and Umbar, but I can see vice versa happening. And yet further they retreat, and they're too strung out here as well. Like at this point, like you need to sort of combine all of your might into one united front to try and at least, yeah, you can see here that I think seeing the fact that yet more of the forces are retreating further back from Cardland, that's the excuse that the attackers were looking for. And now they're going to pour forwards. The ballista firing at them the whole time. They're going to try and retreat back up to the very peak of the hill, but I'm not sure whether they're going to get there. If Linden's infantry, well, I said Linden's infantry is a little bit further behind, so maybe they will get there, but this has brought about the melee engagement. You can see here that the sharpshooters, one unit of sharpshooters charging in, trying to maybe kill off this unit of Alcarondas Legion, running right through them though. Not really sure what Secretariat hopes to do here. Belagair archers into melee. Once again, the attackers will be pleased that the defenders seem to be a little bit more stretched out than they would ideally be. Further down the hill, Noldorin Guard are here. Balakath Axe Guard, Alcarondas Legion, yep. All of the strong units are starting to make their way forward. Already the sharpshooters are shaken. Not really sure what Secretariat hope to accomplish by charging in a single unit. Maybe buying enough time for these units to get further back, but even that doesn't seem to be the case, and still, this antagonises me more than anything. Seeing this lined up on the top of the hill. Like, these are 4 elite units that have just been saved right for the bitter end, and that is not what you should be doing. Absolutely not. They should be on the front line, right now, doing what they can to try and salvage the situation for Carlin, but they're not. They're just sat at the top of the hill because the player in question wants to save them for the late game. Save them for the very end because they're elite units, and for no other reason than that. And they're going to be punished for that, because the rest of their line is going to be absolutely obliterated. And those units will be absolutely no use whatsoever when they're being overwhelmed right at the end. Let that be a lesson. The Noldorin Guard are broken and fighting to the death, which is impressive in its own way. Those crossbows doing the business. Harland Liberatore trying to sort of get into a position. The Mythlon Marines doing their thing. Noldorin Guard up here on this front with the Alcarondas Legion up against Greenway Garrison Archers. Can you imagine if they were up against those elite units, which are finally shuffling down from their peak? Those crossbows are doing a lot of damage, and still the crossfire has been set up, and you can see how damaging the Cardinal crossbows can be. But I just don't think that their units in melee are going to be enough. Like these Greenway Garrison Archers, there's no way they hold on for an extended period of time in melee against an Noldorin Guard. Javelins. Bandits revealing themselves. But again, bandits are one of those units which throw a volley and then charge in. They're going to try and sort of do the thing where you jink in and out and throw volley after volley, but that is quite micro-intensive. We shall see. Balakith Shield Bearers moving forward, more AP for the front line, Narun Aru Sentinels. They're taking losses here on the front line, which is, again, a sign that if Cardlin had just played things a little bit, you know, if they'd been a little bit smarter at certain points in the battle, this could have been their fight. And it does go to show how dangerous Cardlin can be when they dig in with their crossbows, but I feel as though the attackers certainly deserved the win here. They've certainly played very, very well. And having a look here at the percentages, yeah, I mean, it's close. It's within 7%, but again, when it comes down to just pure melee power, I mean, there are still good units like Tharbad Warhammers and the like, but there are Noldorin Blade Masters on the field. There are Harbingers of Castamere. Like, sheer quality and numbers at this point belongs to the attackers. And if it comes down to melee, like you can see here, Greenway Garrison Archers are routing. Narun Aru Sentinels are moving in. There's still some Mythlon Marines throwing javelins in there. The crossbows are doing their best. The Warns of Tir Gorthad and Hearthguard of Amon Sul, who were still up on the hill, refusing to be committed forward. I've said that I would be sort of less critical of players, but you cannot do that. Like, you cannot just leave your elites at the top of the hill and expect everything to work out in the end. It's the last thing you should be doing. It's far too passive, and 0.97 does not reward passive play. It just doesn't. Like, 9 battles out of 10 that I've seen from 0.97 so far, the team that has been more proactive and more aggressive has won. And if you just sit back and hope that you can absorb casualties, that is not the way to do it. So, you know, more passive players need to sort of adapt. Balakith Shield Bearers are in here. Minhiriath Sharpshooters, defeat seems certain. Again, they pull out maces in melee, but they are a hybrid unit, whereas the Shield Bearers are dedicated macemen, although they did just take a huge amount of damage there from the bandits as they throw their javelins in. Looks like the crossbows are trying to get closer to the action. Really, they should be trying to do the opposite. These Tharbad Warhammers are really just showing the rest of their team how to do things on the front line here. But ultimately, they are up against Noldorin Guard and Noldorin Blade Masters, the finest infantry that Lyndon has to offer. And as if that wasn't enough, Harbingers of Castamere are about to join the fray as well. Corsair Fencers have wormed their way behind enemy lines, and they're stopping the last unit of Minhiriath Sharpshooters that had a clear shot from shooting. The Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers also got engaged by Noldorin Guard. Hearthguard of Amon Sul finally committed to melee, but too late. There goes one of the Lyndon generals at the hands of the Cardlin Pikemen. This thin line of Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers, the generals are starting to drop like flies here in the late game. They're wavering in the face of a strong force of Alcarondas Legion, Noldorin Guard and Narun Aru Sentinels. more Balakith shield bearers using their maces against the Hearthguard of Amon Sul. Not a huge amount of army left though. You can see obviously the crossbows, advancing through them is a painful process, but ultimately the attackers did very well. And most of what they do have left, while it is small in number, is elite units. I mean, here we have Noldorin Blade Masters that must have been shot by crossbows on the approach because they've taken a lot of losses, but they're going to help the Balakith shield bearers kill the Hearthguard of Amon Sul. And this is the end at this point. Yeah. The bandits trying to get the sharpshooters into a position where they can resume firing, but it's not going to happen, especially not now the Noldorin Guard are here. There's also still a bit of range pressure coming in from the Castamir's Rangers, from Umbar. Harbingers of Castamir advancing forward, and the death knell of the Cardinal defence here is being rung. That's the end. The Tharbad Warhammers did what they could, but ultimately it was far too late. Like, if the Tharbad Warhammers had been committed to the first layer of defence, things could have been very, very different indeed. But again, I feel as though that is the difference. As the results screen gets ever closer, these men here, they have sharpshooters routing off. And then, finally, the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, who I believe are locked morale, as well as being a morale buffer. And there we go. Victory for the attackers, and well deserved. Well deserved indeed. Like, the attackers did very well. Like, when they committed forward in force, they committed to it. And that's the key. Like, you can't afford to just sort of have these limp-wristed attacks where you just filter in, because it will go very poorly. But in this case, exactly the opposite, and I feel as though the attackers coordinated themselves very well. The defenders, on the other hand, mistakes were made. Nothing terrible, but I do feel as though Secretariat and, you know, the others as well, honestly, like Von Mountain and Waffles, like they were far too conservative with their elite units, I think. Like, they committed their rangers and their crossbows early on, but that was more foolhardy than anything else. Like, they needed Wardens of Tir Gorthad at least on the front line to make it so that Cardlin's low morale problems wouldn't start to come home to roost. And that was what happened. When that sort of, again, that Battle of Hastings, sort of false retreat almost, even though it was a real rout, happened, and Cardlin's line never really recovered from it, the morale problems started to hit almost immediately because the buffing units were nowhere near them. And that perhaps wouldn't have happened if the Wardens of Tir Gorthad and Dunedain captains had been on the front line holding things together. As it was, the defenders fell into the trap of wanting to save them for the late game. Von Mountain got a huge amount of kills, and that mostly comes down to his crossbows, because if Von Mountain did commit his crossbows early, which helped do an awful lot of damage to the attackers on the approach, and even in the late game his crossbows continued to do a lot of damage on the approach, but I would still say that there were a few volleys that were wasted, and in this sort of situation you can't afford to waste volleys with your crossbows as Cardlin when you're facing down two factions like Umbar and Linden who have got such a strong infantry force. But very even amounts of kills across all of the attackers, and that just goes to show, I think, the fact that they worked in tandem very, very nicely. So let's see what did the damage for both Umbar armies, because we'll be able to see both Eclipse getting slightly the higher amount of kills, Alcarondas Legion doing very well on the front line, as you'd expect when they have an infantry advantage over a faction like this. And also 189 on Corsair infantry, so the Corsair infantry may be cheap, but they can certainly pull their weight in a fight. The elites, honestly, were only committed later on, and also they had to advance through a hailstorm of crossbow bolts, so unsurprising that they maybe didn't pick up at the same level of kills. And even though the Castamir's Rangers were only committed later on, they still managed to break the 100 kill barrier. Meanwhile, as for Lister, who may have got the lowest amount of kills on his team, but to be honest with you, they were all very similar anyway, his highest amount of kills again went to the Alcaron... Well, actually no, Balagar archers, so basic archers managed to get the kills, but the Alcarondas Legion once again overall were definitely a big part of why they won that. And again, I feel as though that was... This fight, ultimately, the attackers were able to make it about might in melee and infantry, and that's always going to favour Umbar and Linden over Cardlin, I'm afraid. Cardlin do have some good units in melee, but for the most part, if they do find themselves in a battle like this, they need to utilise their ranged units to their fullest effect, and in particular their crossbows. They kind of did that in places, but they didn't do it often enough. And the attackers ultimately, when they saw gaps in the enemy defence, they went for it and they exploited them to the fullest. So a well-deserved victory here. Big thank you to Eclipse for sending this one to me. I'm always a big fan of these RP battles because it sort of forces people to take into account with all these like sort of unified factions. It's not everyone playing a different faction, so everything goes a bit all over the place. You're forced to think of sort of more macro strategies here, especially from a Cardinal perspective, and unfortunately they weren't able to do that on this occasion. But yeah, a very enjoyable battle. I'm not sure what will be next. I do have actually a replay on a sort of siege map, which I haven't seen before, which is a 2v3, which is actually a fairly long one as well, though. Maybe that one next. I don't know. It all sort of depends. I've been given a lot of replays of late, of course. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.